Brought to you by Purdue University, the only university on Fast Company's Brands That Matter list. 4 years running. Honored as a heritage brand, Purdue pushes innovation and partnership to make a consequential impact on the world. Learn more at purdue.edu/partner with us. Brought to you by Williams. We make clean energy happen.
I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company contributing writer Joe Berkowitz and Fast Company associate editor David Salazar.
Giving through your foundation is the method that least guarantees that it's going to find people who need the money.
Fast Company contributing writer Clint Rainey.
As Vincent has come into his own, he has really made a name for himself as a corporate raider.
And as always, keeping tabs.
I've always been really blown away by just the balls to the wall, galaxy brain energy that he brings to everything.
But first, here's the download, the news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
DNA testing company 23andMe, which filed for bankruptcy in March, has been purchased by Regeneron Pharmaceuticals in auction for $256 million. As part of the deal, Regeneron will acquire much of the company's assets, including the genetic data of its customers. We covered this back when this happened and a few months ago as well. That was a huge sticking point because they have a lot of data that has literally solved crimes. So I don't know who Regeneron is, but they have all of this data. As a condition, though, of the bid, Regeneron is required to abide by 23andMe's existing privacy policies. The deal is expected to close later this year, with 23andMe functioning as a subsidiary of Regeneron.
Google held its annual I/O Developer Conference this week and announced a slew of new AI features and products. These included a new AI filmmaking app called Flow, a new smart glasses prototype, nope, we can't do that again, in partnership with XReal, and a pricey new subscription tier called AI Ultra that gives users access to the company's most advanced AI models and a pass to EDM Festival Miami Ultra. Just kidding. But the most consequential announcement, at least for the future of search, was the rollout of AI Mode, a new tab that lets you search the web using the company's Gemini AI bot. I feel like we already kind of have that, but sure.
Yeah, well, it's integrated into search, so you still have the links below. Now this is like another ChatGPT window, so it's just like, they're like, you don't need those search results. It's kind of separated out.
We definitely do, though, because a lot of the time they're wrong. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother thing, but RIP SEO. Anyways, don't call it a comeback. The streaming service currently known as Max will be changing its name again to HBO Max. Actually, it's renaming itself HBO Max. It was HBO. Then it was HBO Max. HBO Go fell in there sometime. That might have just been an app.
I don't remember that.
Max.
I think it was the app. Yeah.
It's the branding equivalent of moving back in with your parents. The decision to add the HBO back in was because it, quote, represented the highest quality in media. That was a quote from Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav, also my favorite name in media. In addition to reviving the old name for the streaming service, Warner Brothers Discovery is also bringing back CNN Plus, a streaming service that only existed for 1 month back in 2022 before shutting down. We talked about that, the coming and going of CNN Plus with Ryan Stelter back when that happened. I don't know who was clamoring for CNN Plus to get back, but I sure, whatever.
After downgrading the U.S.'s credit rating last week from AAA to AA1, Moody's rating lowered the rating of several major banks, including J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. The downgrades reflect concerns about growing budget deficits from multiple administrations and Congress that show no sign of lessening.
These credit ratings, they're like a 21-point scale. It seems just petty.
Don't try and explain credit ratings.
No, I'm just saying I don't actually understand. I just know that there's 21 different levels to it. And so what does this actually mean in practicality? It's such a weird thing. I don't know. It just seems petty.
Look. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Clearly, financial expert Josh Christensen knows the ins and outs of Moody's credit rating.
You're like, let me tell you about the credit rating scale. I'm like, Josh.
Oh, my God. Let me tell you about bond yields. Bond yields are yields of bonds. Anyways, next story. Major U.S. retailers like Walmart and Mattel are signaling the need to raise their prices in response to the Trump administration's tariffs. Shocker to everybody. And President Trump is having none of it. In response to Walmart's CEO citing the need to raise prices on its latest earnings call, Trump took to social media this past weekend posting, quote, "Between Walmart and China, they should, as is said, eat the tariffs," all caps, "and not charge valued customers anything," all caps on anything. "I'll be watching and so will your customers," 3 exclamation points, end quote.
And finally, Sam Altman and Jony Ive officially announced that OpenAI is acquiring Ive's hardware firm, IO, for a reported $6.5 billion. Ive and his other company, Lovefrom, will oversee all designs at OpenAI as part of the acquisition. This will reportedly lead to the release of a number of AI gadgets. What exactly those gadgets will be and when they will be released is still unknown.
Did you watch the 9-minute video that they released together?
It looked like a fancy cooking show.
It did. It did look like a set piece from Top Chef, which I'm not mad at, but it also just had... They just kind of talked about San Francisco for a while. There was some
it was really cute. There's so many shots of like
quotes.
Russian Hill or whatever. And it was just like, what are you...
It had the energy of just like, the city. It's so mysterious, it's sort of like, and beautiful.
It was a combination of fancy cooking show and travel ad.
Yeah.
And Marriott Bonvoy advertisement.
Yeah, very strange ad. I don't know. These products will probably be super successful, though. I don't know what they're going to be or what they are.
I don't know, because we saw... What was the Apple headset that was a joke?
Oh, the Apple Vision Pro?
It could go the way of Apple Vision Pro.
Humane Pin. They could just make a Humane Pin. I mean, Uber just reinvented the bus. So clearly innovation. We're in a post. They're going to make an iPhone. It's going to be an AI iPhone, which, to be fair, Apple Intelligence sucks. Like, they haven't made Siri work with that. If they can make an iPhone with actual AI that works, probably going to do pretty well.
And that's the news you need to know today. Josh, where do you donate? And how do you evade taxes with that donation?
I like to support the arts companies. So my wife runs a not-for-profit theater company. So I dedicate a lot of my personal time to that not-for-profit. And then there's some other arts organizations that I've supported. I also support a lot of trans rights and LGBTQ plus charities. Like there's a health center here in New York. There's the Trevor Project. There's the Human Rights Campaign. All of these are charities I like to support. Nice. What about you?
I volunteer at this amazing organization called SEO, which stands
You're
for...
You're really dedicated to search engine optimization.
Yeah, exactly. No, it stands for something like... It's got like kind of a silly thing. It's like Scholars for Excellence and Opportunity. But basically, the organization helps lower-income first-generation high schoolers apply to college, take the SAT. It fully funds one of their summer programs. So I am a mentor in that program. I have been for the past 7 years. My kids have all been smarter than me, which is actually very upsetting. And they're always teaching me, like, it's funny because sometimes we'll have like a semi-boring class, but then at the end of the year last year, the teacher asked who was better, Kendrick Lamar or J. Cole, and the room erupted. They were so crazy. So that's one. And then when I was in high school in London, I volunteered at this organization called Cancer Research UK, and I still support them. This is a very earnest
intro.
Front of book section
for print journalists.
For us.
Well, we're talking about this because, well, some billionaires are no longer going to be supporting charities.
Bill Gates is on a deadline. The billionaire recently announced that his long-standing foundation, the Gates Foundation, will only exist for 2 more decades. Then it'll shut its doors. He plans to give away, quote-unquote, virtually all of his wealth through the Gates Foundation to the cause of saving and improving lives around the world. Pretty broad cause. In its 25 years of existence, the foundation has already given away more than $100 billion to initiatives including those addressing global health. Over the next 2 decades, Gates plans for the foundation to double its giving to $200 billion. This week, we invited Fast Company contributing writer Joe Berkowitz and Fast Company associate editor David Salazar to discuss why Gates reached this decision, the current state of philanthropy, and how this new class of billionaires plans to give away its money. So Bill Gates recently announced that his foundation, the Gates Foundation, is going to exist for a couple more decades and then shut its doors. Joe, I'm curious, why did he choose this time to make this announcement? Like, what does it all mean?
I think it might have something to do with a personal awakening on his part. His
Wife left him.
ex-wife,
Yeah.
well, she didn't just leave him, she left the foundation.
Yep.
And she left it specifically because she wanted to do philanthropy in her own way. And then we're finding out, or I guess we found out at the time, his former collaborator in the foundation, Warren Buffett, had kind of clashed with the philosophy of the Gates Foundation toward the end. And then he announced that there was going to be no funds of his in his will for the Gates Foundation. So between those two things, I think Gates might have done some rethinking. And then that's apart from the state of the world in general. And who knows how that weighed on him.
So I want to ask a little bit more about the clash between Gates and Warren Buffett. Do we have a sense of what that was over? Like, what was Warren Buffett unhappy about?
I think there's some of it that's still under wraps, but I think there were three things that Warren Buffett cautioned against over time with any organization. And one of them was arrogance, I believe, and one of them was complacency. And from what I understand, I think he just thought that things weren't happening fast enough. There was too much red tape. And that kind of meshed, I believe, with French Gates, with what she believed about the foundation as well. I think the idea was that there was too much about keeping the Gates Foundation going in perpetuity rather than getting the funds to people who need it when they need it.
So I guess that's maybe why Bill Gates set a timeline.
Yeah.
Gates also had a 3-hour dinner with Trump where he famously said he was impressed with Trump's questions about HIV and polio mitigation efforts. I guess, Salazar, I'll ask you this. Do you think that politics has anything to do with sort of the shuttering of the foundation?
I feel like maybe if it were another person, I would think it were more about politics, but I do think maybe Bill Gates has this ability to sort of step out of politics because he's, not really as active in the business world right now. Like, if you look at things we'll talk about later, there's people who are still sort of in charge of the companies that they started. Like, they've got a lot of other considerations and a lot of reasons to bend the knee and kiss the ring. But I think, it might truly just be like divorced guy in his 70s, going to turn 70, realizing, maybe we can sunset this.
So the U.S. government's cut back on funding through USAID. And I'm curious, I guess, Joe, I'll ask you this. Do you see billionaires stepping up to fill those kind of gaps in global health initiatives?
Well, I think it's too early to say for sure.
Yeah.
I think that some of the more prominent philanthropic billionaires recently have been, Mackenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates. And in terms of their giving, it seems like they're primarily concerned with putting money to causes that have been neglected and underfunded for ages and have recently become kind of verboten because they might fall under the banner of DEI, primarily causes that help women around the globe. And I think they shouldn't have to switch gears and pick up the slack where the US government is now abandoning its efforts. I think this is an opportunity for some new blood to get in there and make a name for themselves with ridiculously generous donations that kind of shame the US government for pulling out for, essentially no reason.
What the hell's going on with the giving pledge? Do either of you have any insight? I know that I think the number of signees has kind of dropped off, but it's still going.
There was a really prescient moment early on in the life of the Giving Pledge. The Giving Pledge started in 2010. And just 3 years later, this hedge fund founder named Robert W. Wilson, he committed suicide. But after his death, BuzzFeed published an email exchange he had with Bill Gates around the time of the Giving Pledge when Gates asked him to join. And in his email, he kind of diagnosed everything that would become public opinion over time about the Giving Pledge. He says your Giving Pledge, and there are quote marks around it, has a loophole that renders it practically worthless, namely permitting pledgees to simply name charities in their wills. I have found that most billionaires or near billionaires hate giving large sums of money away while alive and instead set up family coordinated foundations to do it for them after death. And these foundations become more often than not bureaucracy-ridden sluggards. Love that term. These rich are delighted to toss off a few million a year in order to remain socially acceptable, but that's it. I think that is the view that kind of crystallized over this past decade about the Giving Pledge and its main funders.
Bars.
I guess, although I would think that it's better to give after you're dead than to not. Do you know what I mean?
What he means is that the way they would give, they would put their money in their own foundation. The foundation exists in part to show that, look at me being philanthropical, and then also just to keep going. And then there are another thing that people now seem to know more about billionaires and about philanthropy than they did in 2010 is that it can be used as a tax shelter to get around estate taxes. So, you know, if you want to leave money to your kids, but you don't want to get taxed on it, you can put it in your foundation, and then through some magic that I couldn't quite put my finger on, your kids can access it that way.
Set them up with a plum board seat or become the executive director of the nonprofit, and you're set for life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it always cracks me up. And I say this, I actually interviewed Melinda Gates recently for another publication. I liked her, but the family, or at least Bill, will be like, we're really leaving our kids with not too much money. Like, they need to make their own way. And it's like, dog, you bought your daughter like a $16 million horse farm. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like, what are you? I mean, I guess you're giving away the bulk of your money, but like, what are we really talking about here?
Yeah, I think she missed the entire Nepo baby conversation that's been going on for 3 years now.
Yeah.
This self-made horse farmer entrepreneur.
Well, in fairness, she's like a MD PhD or something. I will give her that.
Fair.
Like,
you can't buy an MD. Well, you can't
Ooh, and one more thing I would say about the State of the Giving Pledge now is that in 2023, the Institute of Policy Studies released a report about how the pledges, it's basically revealed that of the 73 living U.S. giving pledgers who were billionaires in 2010, they saw their wealth grow by 224% when adjusted for inflation in that time. And overall, their giving to intermediaries rather than charities had increased significantly, with 41 cents on every individual donation to charity going to an intermediary, either their own personal foundation or something similar. So I think that injected even further skepticism into the philanthropy and Giving Pledge conversation recently.
And I guess what you're getting at is the arrogance of thinking that organizations that you could donate to may not understand how to spend your money properly. Is that sort of what you're coming out with, the sort of giving through your own foundation?
I think that giving through your own foundation is the method that least guarantees that it's going to find people who need the money getting it. With the Gates Foundation, I think maybe they had the experience and the years of tangible progress to say that they've done it in such a way that it is effective. But I think the average person giving it to a foundation with their name on it, it probably is not going to be anywhere near as effective as the Gates Foundation has been.
And, you know, we have to put this into context on some level, which is there are also billionaires like Elon Musk. You know, he's the world's richest man, and it seems like he just kind of dismantled USAID. I don't exactly know how to ask this, but how do you think that has, or do you think that has affected public perception of billionaires and philanthropy in any way?
I think Elon Musk kind of represents two negative vectors for how people think of billionaires right now. One is that a lot of tech billionaires specifically, they believe now in effective altruism, the philosophy that is supposedly backed by reason and logic, which is that wherever in the world that will most help the longevity of humanity, or just whatever's going to be best for civilization, that's what you should put your money toward. Like for Elon Musk, that might mean colonizing Mars rather than, ending world hunger. So it just so happens to always, or, seems to always be the most effective thing to do is whatever tech thing they're working on at that moment. So that's one. And then also, Elon represents kind of the idea that benevolence now is the equivalent of wokeness. It's the idea that anytime money seems to be going to what was previously termed a good cause, there's something fishy there. There's fraud there and waste, because there's reason to be suspicious, because why would you do that? It seems like the counterpoint to how a lot of people will say that Donald Trump couldn't be bribed because he's already a billionaire. So what does he need more money for? Which, you could probably poke a couple holes in that concept. But I think a flip side to that is sort of, if you do have money and you're putting it towards good causes, what are you up to? And then, and that's aside from, the fact that a lot of previously good causes are now associated with giving a leg up to people who, by all rights, shouldn't need it, according to the billionaire class at this moment.
Well, so speaking of that, and Salazar, I'll ask you this. What is the current state of philanthropic giving by billionaires? But also, let's start with talking about how everyone seems to be pulling out of DEI efforts.
Yeah, I mean, Joe was mentioning a little bit about this, where it's sort of like the idea of benevolence is woke, but also I think that, like, to what I said earlier, like, you have the Chan Zuckerberg initiative where, these are people who were at the inauguration who are really trying to cozy up to the Trump administration, and that just means that anything he doesn't want is something they're not going to do. So, like, he signed that executive order on DEI that's questionably enforceable outside of the public sector, but that people will follow suit and say, okay, well, guess DEI is woke now, guess we better not fund it. And that's something that you've seen from the Chan Zuckerberg initiative. The SF Standard has done a lot of reporting, and other, like, philanthropically focused publications have done a lot of reporting on this. They're shutting down the sort of, like, social activism efforts. They've laid off a lot of people in that area. SF Standard talked to the CEO of an organization that helps Latino entrepreneurs, who said that Chan Zuckerberg Initiative canceled a $500,000 grant out of the blue. They had the Science Diversity Initiative, which gave out more than $1 million to sort of bring diverse people into the science field, and that's been shut down, and it all is sort of in the service of not looking like you're woke, not looking like you want to help anyone who might not deserve it because they're not white or whatever. But to what Joe was saying earlier, like, yes, there's been the shift in the Giving Pledge, but it also seems like it's just been, like, supplanted by these delusions of grandeur that, like, are totally embodied in Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen, who are saying, well, my existence as a rich person who has ideas that will never come to fruition should be sufficient for you peasants, right? Like, oh, I'm going to make a shitty tunnel that only one car can fit through at a time. You're welcome. It's so absurd. And to see them draw back on the actual impact that they could have, like, literally, the easiest way to give your money away is to give your money away. If they actually wanted to do that, they would. That's really what it boils down to. If they really wanted to, they would. For a long time, there was a lot of reputation laundering associated with philanthropy. Look at the Kochs.
Yeah, the Sacklers.
The Sacklers. Look at the David H. Koch Theater at Lincoln Center, right? Like, net bad people doing things that benefit the arts, so that people can say, like, oh yeah, look, they're putting the money to good use. But, like, it's now, like, fully mask off. Billionaires don't have to act like they care about people, and it's really fascinating to watch this shift happen.
There is a new crop of billionaires popping up. And Joe, I'll ask you this. What do you think that means for the future of philanthropic giving? And I just mean more billionaires are being created all the time.
I would hope that they would be inspired by the examples of Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott and Laurene Powell Jobs. I wish I could be more hopeful, but from what I understand, the way to become a billionaire right now is by exploiting loopholes. And I don't have much hope that these new billionaires would be the kind who would exploit loopholes for the good of the world.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I did see some stats about Mackenzie Scott's giving. You know, she's taken this approach of no strings attached, direct gifts to different organizations. And, all the evidence suggests that her donations have had a sort of transformative effect on a bunch of nonprofits. I think there was a quote from the Center for Effective Philanthropy that said overall Scott's Gifts has enabled 85% of nonprofit recipients to improve or expand their programming and given 52% a greater capacity to respond to the needs of the communities they serve. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Totally, yeah. She's been criticized before for kind of overwhelming these people by
Yeah, that's
giving
the
them,
flip
yeah.
side, yeah.
But I think this report came after the criticism, so it's kind of like a good response to it. It's just that even if they are a little overwhelmed, if it's a lot more money than they're used to, she has selected them because she trusts them. She's an example of, trust-based philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
And she trusts that they'll figure it out. And as that report shows, it seems like so far they are figuring it out. It's a great problem to have. We want to give money and we now have too much than we ordinarily know what to do with. I think they're going to figure it out in most cases. And yeah, hopefully the ones, if there are some counterexamples or they haven't figured it out, then I have a hard time thinking that it's going to result in people being more deprived.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, to end this segment, I wanted to ask both of you, do you have a favorite cause or charity that you want to plug here?
Go to GoFundMe, search the word trans, donate $100 to all of them. If you have
I like
that
that.
much money. If you're a billionaire, go to GoFundMe, search trans, give as much money as you can to each one of those fundraisers.
That's great. So we'll be back with Joe Berkowitz and David Salazar for keeping tabs. But first, a quick break followed by my interview with Fast Company contributing writer Clint Rainey.
As affordable, reliable energy demand increases at historic rates, one company is uniquely positioned to accelerate America forward: Williams. We have 117 years of know-how in powering progress, and we're ready to power the next 100 years of innovation. Learn how our natural gas infrastructure is critical to the future of AI at williams.com.
Universal Music Group is one of the world's biggest record labels. Artists under contract with UMG include Taylor Swift, Rihanna, The Weeknd, and U2. But the label's biggest stakeholder, a billionaire power broker named Vincent Bolloré, is in hot water over his corrupt business dealings in Africa. Activists are now urging UMG artists to take a closer look. To unpack this very strange and complicated story, we spoke to Fast Company contributing writer Clint Rainey about the accusations against Bolloré and how Drake somehow became the activists' biggest ally. Clint, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jazz.
This story is actually very complicated, but let's start with, does he pronounce it the French way? Is it Vincent Bolloré?
That's how Vincent pronounces it, but what do we want?
What are these business
It's Vincent Bolloré. Get it right.
So tell me about his quote-unquote industrial empire. What's his deal?
Yeah, so Bolloré's deal is that he's a French billionaire who has made a fortune in a variety of industries. And I think it's probably most accurate to call him an industrialist because that's where it came from. Initially, much of the money at first came from shipping and logistics and even some commodities like rubber and palm oil. But in the last couple of decades, he and really it's his entire family because he has sons who are glommed on to the business, and they have segued into communications, PR, entertainment, media companies.
Classic, let your ancestors do the hard colonial shit and then start having fun. You know what I mean?
No, it really is, because the family business was a paper company, and it made like cigarette paper, Bible paper, just I guess this thin paper that they made very well for a period of time, and managed to acquire vast sums on the production of. But yeah, as Vincent has come into his own, he has really made a name for himself as a corporate raider, like a Bill Ackman style corporate raider who just buys into pre-existing large companies and then through crafty, maneuvering seizes effective control of them.
Does he have the same level of Twitter fingers?
No, I don't think he has much of a presence online
Because
at all.
I was looking
Thank
around for him,
goodness.
and I was like, I've never. Yeah. But he owns Hachette, the book group, and Havas, which is a big PR and advertising agency, right?
As many of these very rich people, particularly rich families, have worked things out, they don't have their name on a lot of this stuff. It's just effective
Yeah.
control, right? So the main media conglomerate that they run is called Vivendi. And Vivendi has a bunch of French media holdings. And anyway, it took the court to establish that, yes, like Vincent Bolloré is indeed the one who effectively controls that company, because like on paper, it's kind of hard to establish that.
I love the idea of having a ton of like shell companies headquartered in the Cayman Islands. It's kind of glamorous. But we should talk about the bad stuff here, which is there's a bunch of corruption allegations levied against Bolloré's businesses. Shocker. Particularly the ones that have ties to a bunch of countries in Africa and West Africa. What is the deal here?
The thing that the family moved into after paper was the shipping and logistics, which I did mention, but that was primarily focused on West Africa, basically on the former French colonies. They expanded into like freight and rail operations, some other infrastructure stuff. I think probably by the 90s, they were some of the largest port operators on the continent and had these bases they had established in these key like coastal cities. And that's sort of the beginnings of these accusations against them, that they used illicit means to acquire the control of those ports. The main criminal complaint against the family is that they effectively bribed officials in Guinea and Togo to get access to the big important ports. And there's a funny irony on the side there, which is that it is Havas that was implicated in that, because the claim is that they used Havas to get the presidents of those countries, used Havas to basically get elected. So
That's funny. And, there's a bunch of corruption allegations, as you outlined, from election meddling, which you just mentioned, to bribery and port monopolies. But there's also corruption trials, sexual abuse allegations. This seems like a very wide-ranging scandal.
it's like Succession magnitude level of alleged wrongdoing, at least in the sense that you think you understand where it ends, and then you read a few more stories and you're like, oh my God, so they're active in that space too, and they're doing this stuff over in that area. Like just in Africa, the stuff that was relevant to this particular story was the allegations of financial wrongdoing, because those were focused on these port contracts, and these NGOs are basically making a pretty clever legal claim that the money that the Bolloré family earned when they sold that one of these logistics businesses was ill-gotten and has to be returned back to the people who live in that country. Whether that can win or not in court is another question, but that's the argument that they're making. But there's this whole separate second type of claim that you were just referring to, Yaz, where it has to do with what goes on the ground, like what happens to the employees, what happens to the local people in those countries, what happens to the environment. Yeah, and it involves everything from wage theft to land grabbing to, in the last few months, things came to a head in Liberia. There was this rubber plantation where the workers set fire to the office in the manager's home to protest mistreatment there that included like sexual coercion of the female employees and stuff like that. Fun stuff.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I don't even know where to start here. This is so crazy.
How far back do these allegations go? Is this like a decades long? Do we have any idea?
Feels like a centuries long vibe, but I don't know.
Well, and this is where I think I have to be careful about trying to remember the specifics because French courts are, like, I mean, just like the U.S. court system, justice can move very slowly in France, but it's
Yeah.
also like the French court system is not like the U.S. court system. And so when you think something is like, oh, that's just a civil lawsuit, right? Then you look deeper at it and you realize that no, actually, a nonprofit can help to bring a criminal complaint against an individual, and that was what happened in the case of Bolloré and his companies. The allegations go back decades. When that began to be sort of litigated in court, I don't know because it's not the same as you're told you have to show up in the court on X date. It's like this office opens an investigation. The investigation lasts a couple of years. Then they come back and they're like, yeah, we have determined that there's enough bad stuff that you've done that we want to pursue this as an actual trial. And, it's a incredibly complicated thing that I'm pretty sure I would manage to screw up if I talked in depth about it.
So has anyone successfully held him or his businesses accountable at all?
To the best of my knowledge, there's one singular incident, and it stems from that Togo bribery charge that I mentioned a second ago. In 2021, not Bolloré, but his company agreed to settle these criminal charges that they had bribed officials in order to get that port concession. And the way that it was resolved in court was the company entered into a negotiated settlement in 2021 to pay a 12 million euro fine to settle the charges.
Not the biggest fine.
Minimal.
Yeah.
For a multi-billion-dollar company, yeah, rounding error, right? But the thing that's critical to note about that is that the Bolloré himself, he attempted to join on to that settlement. He said, I'm part of the company, so I want to be included in the negotiated settlement here. And the French court...
Oh, so he can't get tried again, basically? Is that the idea?
Effectively, because they were all sued or whatever. The criminal complaint went after all of them collectively, right? And so they all were like, yeah, so we all did the same thing, so we will all agree to admit guilt and pay one fine. And the judge said, not so fast, Vincent Bolloré. Like, what you're accused of is so serious that you're not allowed to latch on to this. And so he's been effectively waiting for his day in court. And there are a handful of corporate watchdogs in France. Sherpa is this kind of big one that I spoke with, and they are pretty sure that trial will finally happen in the coming year. And that will be him individually on trial for bribery, basically.
Yeah, he was indicted in 2018, so this has been kind of winding through the courts for a long time.
Forever.
Now, to get a sense of, the scope of Bolloré's dealings, you've compared the business to Succession, you've compared him to Rupert Murdoch. Tell me about that comparison. What are kind of the properties that he controls? Give us a scope of his influence.
I would imagine if you live in France that you know him as the person who is behind all of these right-wing media outlets. And honestly, I don't even know that the Fox News analogy is the best one because the content that his holdings puts out in France is probably more like Fox News here, but in France, it's more like One America or Newsmax or, it's as extreme as anything, right? And C News is the one that has the most sway at this point. It is effectively like Fox News if it were free. Like everyone in France has access to C News.
Great.
Right. And I guess it's not even just France. It's anyone in the Francophone world who gets French TV. So it probably spills beyond the borders even of France.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this and it's anti-vax rhetoric, calls for Muslims to resign their faith, interest in the Great Replacement theory, which, always funny to me, suggestions that immigrants cause the pre-Olympics bedbug infestation. I mean, this is crazy. Well, except that we also have it here.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, I was like, okay. Yeah, it is crazy. I'm glad no major political figures support anything like the Great Replacement theory here. This just sounds like the Republican Party platform.
One thing that made me laugh is I haven't spent that much time reading up on, the Marine Le Pen stuff and the recent elections, I guess, got me looking at this a touch, but I didn't realize how much the right in France is obsessed with, le wokisme.
I was going to say le wokisme is so funny.
is bad over there too. So, so if you listen to too much C News, you get like the French Jesse Waters or whatever on there talking about like how woke, academia is and blah, blah, blah.
Can we talk about Universal Music Group and Bolloré
Yeah, how
connections
is he
there?
connected to UMG?
The Universal Music Group connection is effectively that's one of the many holdings that he and Vivendi have. UMG used to be owned outright by Vivendi. In 2021, big year for him just in terms of all kinds of exciting things going on, good and bad. The family decided that there was a bunch of sort of unrealized capital gains embedded in UMG, and so they spun it off as its own separate publicly traded company. It debuted at over $50 billion, and the family set it up so that they profited off the IPO, but then they also kept 28% of UMG for themselves.
So for this story, I mean, you kind of managed to connect the two, right? So you connected the complaints levied against Bolloré and his business empire brought forth by this nonprofit group Restitution for Africa, and then the rest of his businesses. But first, tell us about this complaint that was levied against him.
Okay, so yeah, we should probably move back to March, which was the latest legal complaint that surfaced. And this involves Restitution for Africa and 10 other NGOs that are based there in West Africa. And they, as a group, filed this complaint saying that Guinea and Togo have already come on the French prosecutor's radar, and they have some things to say about that. But they throw in more accusations about corrupt port deals. Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Cameroon were the ports in those three countries were the ones that this complaint adds to the list. And it effectively makes the same argument. And then that's also where this attempt to tie in the money that the Bolloré family earned when they sold this company called Bolloré Africa Logistics. And they sold it for around $6 billion, as I recall. And the complaint says that all of the business misconduct, which they go as far as to call money laundering, the restitution for that should be that the money comes back to those countries as opposed to the French government, which has been the way that it's happened in the past. The French government would, just absorb the damages from a case like that. And so they're making a sort of a novel argument that the money should go back to the countries where the damages occurred.
And it sounds like the organization is sort of using Bolloré's connection to UMG, partial ownership, to advocate for itself. So it's gotten major artists under contract with UMG to sign a petition about him. Tell, what artists does it include? How successful has that been?
Who in America knows who Vincent Bolloré is? This is not exactly a name that rolls off the tongue to begin with, much less people knowing what he does and what his business interests are and all of that. And I think that the thinking on Restitution for Africa's side was we just need...
Like if Taylor Swift can talk about this problem.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
If we can get any of the however many hundreds of artists who are signed to a record label under the world's largest music company, if we can get any of them to speak out against this individual, then it helps build our public case against him. I don't want to speak for Restitution for Africa here in terms of how likely they think it is that any of the UMG affiliated artists will even sign the petition or speak out. I don't know that they care, that they have been after Bolloré for a long time trying to get him held accountable for these things that he's done without clearly that much success so far. And I think this is sort of like a new front in that.
So to be clear, it sounds like none of the artists have responded to the letter yet. And those include, Taylor Swift, Rihanna, The Weeknd, Usher, SZA, U2, some of the biggest acts on the planet. But they're still kind of working on it, right?
Most of those artists don't have a strong Africa connection, but, some of them do. And I imagine that the hope is that the ones who, like Rihanna or U2 is a UMG artist, and, Bono has been pretty loud about corruption in Africa for a number of years. And I suppose that the hope is that between them doing humanitarian work and being involved in these anti-corruption efforts and also having a conscience, that they would see what's going on with the largest shareholder for UMG and decide that, like, okay, this is something that's actually worth speaking out about. None of them have obviously yet, but I think that's the idea.
It sounds like we're all having trouble holding Bolloré accountable. How impactful do you think artists speaking out can actually be? Do you think artist platforms are powerful enough to affect change? I would say if Taylor Swift posted, she could do a lot, but, I don't know if Limp Bizkit would, really move the needle.
There's a lot of good jokes there, I feel like, but
You got to have
I don't
faith.
know. There we go. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, partly because it's more complicated than just can we make him look bad. I guess I'll come back to that part. But the first thing I think is just how do you force someone to divest from a company? You sort of can't, right? Like UMG can't force Bolloré to divest. It's a publicly traded company. He can own as much of it as he wants. He can buy more if he wants. And the idea that therefore public pressure, even from famous celebrities, will help him to voluntarily choose to divest his ownership stake does seem maybe a bit far-fetched. But I do think probably Restitution for Africa, some of those other anti-corruption NGOs I talked to, feel that the point here is it's less about forcing him out of UMG than it is just to make his life more uncomfortable and to draw more attention to shine a light on more of the stuff that he is involved in, make his name well known enough that, I don't know, maybe people protest outside of UMG shareholder meetings or Vivendi shareholder meetings or whatever. Because at the end of the day, and this is probably me speaking more editorially than it is what Restitution for Africa is after, but in reporting this, I think what became clear is that like Bolloré's power and his family's power it's not just that they've grown in scale in recent years, but they've also grown in scope. Like they've swallowed up more of France's media industry at a time when there's an increasing threat to free press and democracy in the West. And that seems pretty germane to everybody. Like you can say that a port contract scandal from a decade ago, 2 decades ago, maybe doesn't matter that much to someone living in the United States from Africa, but the attack on media and the attack on democracy, however, is pretty relevant. And that's something that you could imagine some of these artists agreeing to take up and make into an issue that they push.
Well, Clint, thank you so much for talking us through this.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back with Joe and David, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we are following right now. And Joe, David, since you're our guests, what are you keeping tabs on? Joe, let's start with you.
Well, something I've been keeping tabs on here and there since around last Thanksgiving is this big account on Blue Sky. It's this guy, his name is Brendel, unless that's his surname, his handle is Brendel Board, Bored. And around Thanksgiving last year, there was an article about a new publisher called Spines, which aimed to disrupt the publishing industry by using AI to publish 8,000 books in 2025 alone. It was just one of those AI stories that makes you want to throw your head against the desk as hard as possible.
And you're an author, so especially you have actually written books.
AI has been trained on them. So
amazing.
Anyway, this account, Brendel, he quote tweeted a link to that article and said, "Joke's on them. I'm going to use AI to come up with 8,000 businesses for dipshits," if I'm allowed to say that.
You're totally allowed.
Anyway, he's not in the thousands yet, but he has been throwing out ideas for dumb AI businesses, and a lot of them are completely ridiculous and over the top, but some of them are just barely more egregious than what you find in the news every day. I'll just throw a few examples out.
Yeah, give us some examples.
Sure. Number 4 is facial recognition software to help distinguish white guys with beards from each other.
I could use that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah. Number 22, VersaCash is a service that gives you 3 $5 bills for every $20 bill, so you can use your money in more versatile ways. And number 52 is a documentary where the Rizzler, asks questions to an AI chatbot of Aristotle and sees if it can pass the Turing test. It's just a lot of goofy stuff like that. Some of it more close to reality than other things. But I just, every now and then when I see a post of his on Blue Sky, I will scroll back and see what his latest ones are because he just keeps going with them. So that's something I've been keeping tabs on the last few months.
Incredible keeping tabs.
I'd pay money for the Rizzler thing, by the way.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I'm a little depressed that I don't have to explain who the Rizzler is, but this
Yeah,
is
you know,
2025.
I was texting with Lidsky and he sent me some comedy bit about how the Rizzler is so bleak and, manufactured or whatever. But I gotta say, that kid gives me so much joy every time I see him on screen. Like I'm like,
great.
I don't really care if there's a big conspiracy behind him.
He's living his best life.
Yeah, he seems to be having a good time. David, what are you keeping tabs on?
I think the thing that I'm keeping the most tabs on right now is The Rehearsal, Nathan Fielder's
Oh my God.
The Rehearsal. It is like in the vein of sort of an AI chatbot generating insane business ideas. Like Nathan Fielder is that. I've always been really blown away by just the like balls to the wall, galaxy brain energy that he brings to everything. And it's just sort of like, I don't know if you're familiar at all, Joe, but it's...
Oh, yeah.
You're okay. All right. So for people who are unfamiliar, it's really hard to explain, but essentially Nathan Fielder has a show premised on rehearsing for big things in your life, that this season is somehow about airline safety and getting co-pilots to talk to pilots and assert themselves. And it's just so fascinating. There's like massive puppetry involved. He tries to relive Sully Sullenberger's life from start to Miracle on the Hudson. Everything is insane.
He becomes an official spokesperson for the autism community.
And doing the really nice, like, tongue-in-cheek thing where he's like, as a normal person without autism, I'm trying to understand someone with autism, and I just love rehearsing things. It did lead to the entire room of people I was watching the rehearsal with take the, like, can you tell someone's emotion from their eyes test? And I'd just like to say I was the least autistic person in the room.
I wish I could have watched the second episode, the one with Paramount Plus and Summit
That was
Ice.
really, really funny.
I wish I could have watched that in a theater with other Nathan Fielder fans, because it just felt like it would. Yeah, we could have all bonded over that. I mean, my wife and I watched together and laughed a lot, but felt like we could use more people on that.
And I love how he keeps bringing it up randomly. He'll be like, I work for Paramount, a network with questionable views.
Yeah, I would say The Rehearsal is definitely best watched with a crowd. My like White Lotus viewing party has transitioned into a Last of Us and Rehearsal viewing party.
No, I couldn't do Last of Us in a crowd. It's too depressing.
It is pretty sad. You got to riff a little, but just the like shouts of fear and delight when the massive Sully's mom puppet walked through like 50-foot door. It was incredible.
There is nothing he could do that could really surprise me, because I already expect to be surprised with every single thing Nathan Fielder does. So I guess it's just the degree of surprise is kind of priced in.
And it's not just him either, right? Like there was a tweet that's like, his theory is just point a camera at a person and they will reveal themselves to be completely deranged on some level.
He has a real talent for finding like the weirdest fucking people.
It goes back to Nathan for You, where he was talking to that gas station owner who's like, I drink my grandson's pee.
That was absolutely his best work.
He's not even able to keep it together when this guy's talking about drinking his grandson's pee. Who told you that? My grandma. Okay, Yaz, what are you keeping tabs on?
This is a total downer, and I was thinking about this over the weekend, but Usher's had this like massive reputational glow up over the past few years, right? And in fairness, like that Super Bowl performance was amazing. Reminded us all how many hits he had. His Vegas show seems super fun, and I believe the New York Times had an article about how he gave Emory University's commencement speech yesterday and like actually wrote it and shared some very vulnerable moments in his life. Unfortunately, it did come...
These are my confessions. Sorry.
Still remember when I was listening to it recently with a friend and they were like, that's actually a crazy confession. I was like, okay. But It also comes, I think his name just came up during the Diddy trial because he witnessed P. Diddy, doing something bad to Cassie. I want to say like beating her up or something.
Oh,
and
no.
I just keep thinking as I followed this trial that this is like going to be like a sort of Jeffrey Epstein's black book situation, where the
Speaking
names
of
of like,
billionaires.
yeah.
I mean, he had a famous annual party for big names.
Yeah.
And who knows what happened at those and who was there.
But it weirdly seems like so far people are coming off unscathed. Like for a while it was like, oh, is Ashton Kutcher going to get canceled? Because there was some clip of him being like, I can't talk about what's going on at those parties. No, he's been fine. Usher clearly like doing okay. I keep waiting for something big to happen, but I guess it's like one of those things where it was in plain sight for so long. Like everybody knew.
Like Weinstein. Only,
Yeah,
we're sort
yeah.
of past the point where there are social consequences for behaving that badly. If P. Diddy gets convicted, once he gets out, he could very well run for mayor of New York,
Oh my God.
Like, there's zero consequences anymore for doing horrible things forever.
Well,
Anyway.
bit of a bleak note to end on, but that's it for most innovative companies. David, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
us.
Our show is produced by Avery Miles and Blake Odom with help from Sam Gebauer and Hawa Atori. Editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.